I'm Julia, this is Livia, and this interview is part of the Future of Work series at UC Davis. Today we'll be chatting with Jaime Casap, the Chief Education Evangelist at Google. So why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, your work, and how it's changed in response to the pandemic?
Okay, we'll start there. So thank you very much for having me. Let me give you a little bit of a quick background because it'll help you kind of contextualize what it is that I want to talk about. So I have been the Chief Education Evangelist at Google for the past 14 years. I launched Google Apps for Education into the university space back in 2006 here in Arizona. I'm broadcasting from my office in my studio here in Phoenix. Launched Google Apps into the higher education space in 2006, launched Google Apps into K-12 a couple years later, and then had this crazy idea of launching Chromebooks into education. So my job at Google has been to work with the different teams that are doing things in the education space. And that list has grown over the years. You know, it was two of us that started this, and taking the products that engineers have created and figuring out how to bring them into the education space. Now the team is a couple hundred people. It's all over the place, and my job is to be a thought leader, if you will, or a subject matter expert, if you will, into those spaces that are doing things. I also get to travel around the world and speak at events and work with institutions and work with nonprofits that are in the education space. And one of the benefits of that is that I get to hear what's going on. I get to hear what the issues are, what the problems are, what the future of work looks like in different regions. So I get to bring all that back, not just to Google, but also to be able to talk to other people about that. Other things are, I helped start a school here in Phoenix called the Phoenix Coding Academy that's focused on computer science as a language that students learn in all subjects that they're learning at the same time in a cross-disciplinary way. I do consulting work with higher education institutions and other organizations that are focused in the education space. And all of this is built on my passion for education, right? And the problem that I'm trying to solve, which is the education issue. And it's all based on this idea that I believe that education disrupts poverty, and that education changes families' destinies, and that education is what moves us forward. And I also believe that we look at education as a process, something that happens to us. And what I'm trying to do is get people to understand that education isn't a process, that it has to be a mindset, that it's this continuous learning opportunity that we all possess and that we all have, right? So that's kind of what I'm focused on, because I am one of those kids that we often talk about. I'm a first-generation American. I was born and raised in Hell's Kitchen, New York. I grew up in poverty. I grew up on welfare and food stamps. And so for me, the reason I get to talk to you guys is because I've had a pretty amazing career because of education, right? So that's my belief. That's what I'm trying to bring to other people. And the problem that I'm trying to solve is this idea that either I am a super genius with a 500 IQ, which my wife thinks I think, or there are millions of students who are just like me who have either missed an opportunity or don't have the access or hasn't had the luck, right? And luck becomes one of those critical success factors for students like me, and we got to eliminate luck as a requirement to success. It's part of everyone's success, but it seems to be the only requirement when it comes to people who are growing up like me. All right, so that's kind of the context of what it is that I work on and what I'm trying to do. Now, I've been preparing for this pandemic for 12 years. And the reason I say that is because I work for my studio here in Phoenix, and even though Google is not a telecommuting, people who work from home kind of company, I've been doing it full time, and there's not very many of us that get to do this, but I've been doing it for 12 years. So for me, being in one place and working in my studio, and this is why I have great equipment, is because I usually broadcast from here, and I run my YouTube channel from here, and I do other things. So for me personally, nothing's really changed. As a matter of fact, this idea of being able to communicate has actually, to me, almost doubled because I don't have to travel, right? So personally, if you said to me, hey, look, we don't want you to travel anywhere. We want you to sit in your studio by yourself. You can't visit anyone and no one can visit you. I would think that someone was like punking me. I'd be like, are you serious? Like, this is a dream for me, right? So from a personal perspective, this has been a heaven for me, right? Now, I feel guilty for that because there's people who are suffering and there's people who are losing their jobs and all that. But for me personally, I love being in the space that I'm in and given the opportunity to work on things that I've been wanting to work on for a long time. Now, the one thing that I had been missing was the ability to travel and to go see what's happening in the rest of the world. And a couple of weeks ago, I launched a video on my YouTube channel for educators, for professors, and for teachers, high school teachers, to say, hey, invite me into your classes if you want, right? Like, I'll come in and talk to your students about whatever topics you want me to talk about. I thought that I would get maybe 10 responses, and I kind of miscalculated the number of people that would reach out to me. And now my schedule is like from 6 in the morning to like 4 in the afternoon doing things like this. I literally, right before I got on the call with you, I had just booked a meeting that I'm having with professors in Ethiopia, at 11:30 at night on May 7th, right? So I have all this stuff that's happening. Now, the consequence of that, and that was me just saying, hey, look, everybody's home, all your students are online, I could do this. And the consequence of that has been that I now still get to see what's happening around the world. And I get to hear what the questions are. I get to hear what the issues are. I get to hear what the concerns are from students from as early as 5th grade, which, by the way, so far has had the best questions that I've heard, all the way through graduate school and talking to classes and listening to their concerns. So I think that the goal of understanding what's happening in the world and what's happening in education, for me, hasn't changed very much because I've been able to still travel around the world through the technology that we have.
Yeah. All righty. Well, you are a man who wears many hats. I am impressed. Very inspiring. And we're excited to dive into these topics with you. There's a lot to explore. And as you said,
sure.
You hear a lot, you see a lot. You can give us the inside scoop. So I think the question I want to start with is something that you were talking about. Obviously, the pandemic is an important moment of reckoning for this country and countries around the world. So with regard to traditional education, but also edtech and online learning, what existing social, economic, and policy constructs do you think are now being exposed as ineffective and problematic?
Yeah, okay. That's a great question because and I've been thinking a lot about this, and I think there's 2 spaces to focus on. Number one is, for those of us who have been in the equity space for a long time, there's nothing new about inequity, right? There's nothing new about the disadvantage that students who are growing up like I am growing up have. There's been no secret about students who live in rural areas and having access and having equipment and those things. We've known about this for a long time. I think now you can actually see it, right? It's out there, right? The light is on the inequity. The light is on the lack of access. The light is on what some of our students deal with on a day-to-day basis. And so all of a sudden now we're seeing what is happening in this space, right? So that's an important element. And I think that there will be some positive reaction to that. As a matter of fact, no matter what your political slant is in the world, even the president of the United States a couple of days ago said, like, we need to work on infrastructure. And the first thing that he mentioned was broadband, right? So that all of a sudden has come up to the top of the list of infrastructure needs that we need across the board. And having students who have access to computing power, to access to technology in their home. We also see areas of inequity around food scarcity, right? And food deserts, and students who we realize, oh, wait, some students go to school because that's where they're safe. Some students go to school because that's where they eat. Oh, I never really thought about that. And all of a sudden we're seeing this, right? So I tweeted out, I think it was yesterday, got an interesting reaction, which was, I got tired of seeing the ad that said, in these challenging times, if you need help paying for your Cadillac, we'll take it easy on you, right? Like those in challenging times. And I got tired of that. Like, I tweeted out, there's millions of people who are living in challenging times long before this pandemic showed up, and yet for some reason we don't talk about them. Or this idea that when I was growing up, I don't ever remember saying anyone being empathetic or recognizing that I was living in challenging times for 21 years. So all of a sudden there's this recognition that there's challenging times, and that even though you might be going through a challenging time now, there's lots of people who are going through challenging times all the time, right? So that's a good thing. And I hope we do something about that. That's part one. The second part is that what we're seeing is schools trying to take their model, and you could call it traditional, you could call it whatever you want. I don't actually like the word traditional. It's like, you know, old Coke versus new Coke. I don't get it. But the whole idea of the model that's currently used in schools, which is one teacher with 30 students all facing the teacher and listening to the teacher while the teacher guides every action, that model is trying to be replicated online, right? That was what we've gone through for the first 30 days of this. And the recognition is like, yeah, that doesn't work, right? It's just not gonna work. And you see the frustration and the struggle. And so what I'm hoping comes out of this is a realization that we can't just replicate the model online. Or worse, what we're doing in schools right now, even before the pandemic, is saying, oh, all we need to do is put technology on top of the current model and things will be better. And that's just not going to happen. What I'm hoping, the second thing that I'm hoping that we go through from an education perspective is to understand what are the critical skills that our students need? What are the best ideas that we have about what good learning looks like? And then how do we use the tools that are available to us to bring those ideas to life? And I'm starting to see some of those conversations happen, and that's exciting.
Mm-hmm. Would you be willing to speak to a little bit how you personally think this model should change, be that small tweaks or radical changes that would make it better suited to the online environment?
Yeah, and that's a great question, because I don't think it's one or the other. I think it's a combination of both. I think from a radical point, we should have radical ideas, right? So for example, we know through science, I'm not making this stuff up, by the way, there's research on all of this, right? So we know through research and science that the best learning is self-directed, right? We know that. We know, for example, that looking at the future, the critical skills that our students are going to need are, you know, problem solving, collaboration, the ability to learn, creativity, critical thinking, those things, right? How do we teach our students those things, and how do we assess that, right? So it's this, like, the world that we lived in before the pandemic is we kind of went like, nah, to most of the things that we knew were true, right? So for example, take a standardized test. There's not a machine in this world that can't do better on a standardized test than a human, period. That's just period, right? And so we know that. So why are we still teaching students things that we're gonna test them on that a machine can do better anyway, right? That just seems like a waste of time. So that's radical ideas that you can come up with to change models. And by the way, lots of schools around the world are doing lots of these different things right now, even before the pandemic, right? So you have High Tech High in San Diego, or in Philadelphia, you have the Science Leadership Academy, or Brooklyn Tech in New York, and there's all these schools that are doing these kinds of like student-centered learning already, and it works really well. So we know it works. It's just a question of will and whether we're going to be lazy and do it, right? So that's one. And then the second part of that is so that's the radical idea. Now, how you get there is through small steps, right? So what I think we need more than anything in education isn't like some big blow up of education. It's a culture shift. It's to think of education and what we do in education as something that we do in iteration and innovation in small steps. So when someone asks me what's the future, based on what's happening, what does the future classroom look like? My answer is there is no future classroom in the ideal world. The future classroom is Monday, and then Tuesday, and then Wednesday, and then Thursday. And that kind of culture of constantly improving, constantly doing things better, constantly assessing, constantly finding the right solutions to things, that's the model that we need in education to get to those big ideas.
While we're on this topic of radical changes to the models that we see in education today, I'd like to skip ahead a little bit and ask you what's probably my favorite question that we planned out for this interview, which it has to do with a quote that was recently given by NYU professor Scott Galloway on his personal blog. So he recently, earlier this month, he wrote about how many programs, college programs, could become online hybrids soon, in the process consolidating enrollments among a smaller number of high-quality university brands. And he also mused over whether this shift might bring more learning to humans while also eroding our humanity, in reference to campus-based liberal arts education becoming a luxury, while high-quality vocational skills training that's totally unbound by geography grows. In your opinion, what do you think the new normal could look like with respect to higher education and college campuses?
Yes. Okay. So I actually saw that quote, and a couple of things about that. First, anytime I see any quote, my first reaction to a quote is that's not something that's new. I'm sure it's been said in other ways before. And so for me, there's a couple of things about that quote that even someone like me has been talking about for a number of years, and we'll get to that in a second. But this idea of higher education, let's stop there and ask ourselves a more fundamental question, which is, what is the value proposition of higher education? Now, I don't get into these discussions about should you go to college or should you not go to college, right? Like, you don't need a college degree, you need a college degree. And I don't get into those discussions because it's usually brought up by people who have a college degree. So I look at data and I see that if you have, and I'm making up the numbers, but they're generally true, right? So if you have a high school degree, you make $30,000 a year. If you have a college degree, you make $45,000 a year, right? That's kind of the difference. That's data today, 30, 45. Until I see those numbers be exactly the same, then I'm gonna tell students to go to college, right? Because those numbers are not equal, right? So that's number one. Number two is, especially for students who are growing up like me, right? Like this idea that you don't need a college degree, to me means, oh, you can use your network. Sure, my 19-year-old can use my network, but me at 19, I didn't have a network, right? So I have to build my network. So this idea of college or not college doesn't make sense. What makes better sense for me is, what is the value proposition of higher education? And I'm actually working with a number of higher education institutions right now on defining that and talking about that and creating what that value proposition is. So for example, I'll give you a couple of examples. Number one is, one of the value propositions of higher education is the curation of information, right? So much information is coming at you as a student that it would be great for the university to say, look, you're interested in these subject areas, or you want to solve this problem. Here, let me curate that information for you. Let me give you the right information. When you have so much information coming at you, then someone saying, let's limit the scope of that or focus on this space, that's a value that most students need, right? So that's part one. The second value of higher education, as far as I'm concerned, is expertise, right? Whether that's online, offline, on campus. I was speaking at The Ohio State University, and on my way to speak, I walked across the campus and I got to the event. I'm standing there with the president of the university and a couple of other people in a circle. And I said, hey, I just walked across the campus and I am so unbelievably jealous. And they're like, what are you talking about? I'm like, I see students roaming around, and like the fact that they have like all these inputs and all these outputs of things that they can do. And I said to this group who are all like about my age, and I said, can you imagine being like 45 or 55 years old and having 4 years of all this expertise that you could just dive into? How are we not selling that to students, right? That's expertise. You collected institutional knowledge, expertise. How do we tap into that? Yet we're still focused on what classes you can take. And that doesn't make any sense to me. The third value proposition of higher education is the ability to help students build skills that they need in a safe space, in a controlled space. So collaboration, problem solving, the ability to learn, creativity, the human skills that we need. How can higher education help students improve those skills? How do you teach students how to measure how they're doing in those skills, right? That's a value proposition for students that they could take advantage of. And then the last thing that is a value proposition for higher education is this idea of real lifelong learning. And I'll give you an example. Michael Crow, the president of ASU, a mentor, a friend. I can plug his latest book. He sent me his latest book. It's not even out yet. Great guy, smart, one of the smartest people I know. And a couple years ago, I said, I have a, by the way, just more context. I have a 27-year-old, a 19-year-old, and a 5-year-old. So I like one kid at a time, right? And that's all backfired on me because they're all in my house now. So my plan completely failed because they're all in the house driving me insane at the same time in 3 different generational types. Anyway, so a couple years ago, we're at one of those Arizona dinner fundraiser things, and we're sitting at the same table. And I said to him, and my daughter at this point had graduated from ASU 2 years before that in film. And a degree in film production, and she's doing exactly that now. She actually works she lives in New York and works at CNN. She makes fake news. So we were having this dinner, and I said, hey, and my daughter had graduated 2 years. And I go, hey, why did you abandon my daughter? And he looked at me and he's like, okay, what do you want? I'll bite. I said, she graduated from ASU 2 years ago and she hasn't heard from you since. What do you mean? Well, she gets the Alumni Association emails. She gets the discount Visa credit card offer. But why doesn't she get an email 6 months, 9 months, a year after she graduates that says, hey, Lane, what are you doing today? And using the technology we have today, oh, you're working at CNN and you're working in video production. I just scanned your transcript from your time here, and you took a lot of video production classes. But 2 years have gone by, and there's been a lot of updates to those video production classes. Would you like to take a refresher course? Oh, I scanned through your transcript. Looks like you didn't take a journalism class, and you're working in journalism. Would you like to take a journalism class? And by the way, there's 12 other people who also are interested in a journalism class who live in New York. Would you like to form a learning community? We'll find you a facilitator to guide that learning. I can do that right now with the technology that exists. So this idea that we're creating class systems doesn't make sense to me. What I think we need to do is build a lifelong learning model, and students can take advantage of the technology we have to create that. I think a lot of these quotes that you hear, and I got into a debate once with a New York Times reporter, and he said, you know, the job of colleges today is that they need to prepare students for the next 40 years of their life. And I'm like, that is the most insane thing I've ever heard in my life. You can't do that. What you can do is create a partnership for the next 40 years. And that is the difference. This idea that all those quotes, all that philosophy is still about what classes students take. And again, they think about education as a process. And I say education is a mindset. And how can universities, how can higher education create a mindset and the value propositions of mindsets that they can help those students with?
Yeah, I mean, the idea of refresher courses, I haven't heard that before personally. So I think that would be fascinating.
Right.
Yeah.
My point to him was a simple one. And why isn't everything that she wants to learn for the rest of her life? She wants to learn about lights. She wants to learn how to fly a drone. She wants to learn how to fly fish. Whatever it is that she wants to learn for the rest of her life, why isn't she going to ASU.edu first? She's already trusted you for 4 years. She's already committed all that time and money she committed my money, but she committed all that time and energy to do that. She already knows that you can teach her. So why don't you have partnerships with fly fishing companies and lighting companies and creating this kind of environment for the student? And the last thing I'll say about this is that all these quotes and all these things that people say, if you dig into the root cause, it's still about the institution. It's still about the professor or the administrator or the institution. What are the quotes about students? What's the you know, if there's one thing I've learned at Google in 14 years, it's focus on your users. Just what is in the best interest of your users, and in this case, students. What is in the best case of them, and build everything around that.
Yeah, I mean, it all makes sense to me. And before we move on to some of our more student-oriented questions, I do want to ask you one related question. So thinking about these broader systemic changes, In the aftermath of the pandemic, what new jobs and roles do you think could be created in education, both at the K through 12 level and with regard to higher education?
Yeah. The interesting thing about jobs is that I tend not to look at the world in terms of jobs, right? So one of the things that I get quoted on all the time is this idea of that their jobs is a silly way of looking at the world, right? So you can look at jobs, and there are people who have jobs, but for those of us that want to think at a higher level, then maybe a job isn't the best way to think about it. And the example is that I'll ask you guys, have you ever been asked what you want to be when you grow up?
Oh, yes.
Right. There, in the 12 years that I've been asking students that question, as far down as third grade, every student I've ever talked to has been asked that question. I've seen people ask my 5-year-old that question, right? And she wants to be an astronaut. But that question, it's not that it's a bad question, it's that it's an old question. It comes from the olden times when I was a kid, about 100 years ago, when life was more, I don't want to say stable, that's not the right word, where change happened more gradually. We don't live in that time because change happens gradually and then suddenly, right? That's all changes. If you break it down, if you go deep into any big change, you'll notice that it happened gradually for a very long time and then boom, it just happened suddenly. We are now living in suddenly times. So that question of what do you want to be when you grow up comes from the old world where jobs change, but very gradually, very slowly, maybe not at all. Today, that's not true, right? Look at what's happened in the last month in terms of the shifts that we're having in employment and jobs. Look at what's happening with the different roles that we're creating. Look what automation, technology, digitalization is having an impact on everything. So the better question that we should be asked, and I got 4 friends who are working in spaces that you don't even know about, right? So the better question to ask, and one more highlight, when I graduated from graduate school, Google didn't exist. So how could I ever want to get a job at Google when I'm in graduate school? Okay, so if instead of, the better question to ask our students is what problem do you want to solve? What's the problem that spins in your head? And it doesn't have to be a social problem, even though that's the first place most students' minds go to. It can be anything. It could be making better lights, making better microphones, doing dog training, well, whatever. What's the problem that you want to solve? And it could be climate change. Let's say that's what it is, that you want to solve climate change. And then the second question to think about is, how do you want to solve that problem? And that's an important question to consider because there are millions of ways to solve a problem. And so how do you want to take your gifts, your talents, your passions to solve that problem? So let's use a climate change example, right? So you want to solve climate change and you say that to a professor, you say that to a teacher or parent, administrator, they're going to go straight to, oh, climate change. Oh, listen, you need to study STEM. You need to be a scientist. You need to be research. You should get a degree in global sustainable development, right? Like that's the first place that people will bring you to. But what if that's not where your passion is? Maybe that's not where your talents are. I'm a photographer. That's my first love. And I joke about how I'm a professional photographer because I've sold some photos before. And I've made a grand total of like $300, but still makes me, technically speaking, a professional photographer. And it's one of my passions, one of the things, I'm good at it, I like doing it, I love learning, and all those things. Now, what if I wanted to solve climate change, and that's where my passions were, and that's where my drive was? The way I can solve climate change is by going out and documenting climate change, and photographing climate change, and telling stories about climate change. What if you're a gifted educator, like my 19-year-old, he will be either a high school teacher or a college professor. I knew that since he's been 5 years old. What if he wants to solve climate change by creating education programs, creating awareness programs, what if you're a talented writer? The way you can solve climate change is by writing books about climate change. Like there's a million ways to solve a problem. Don't get stuck on one way, right? And then the third question to think about is, what do you need to learn to solve that problem? What are the knowledge, the skills, and the abilities that you need to have to solve that problem? And then how do you start building those knowledge, skills, and abilities? How do you start developing the skills that you need to solve that problem? And there's two angles here, right? So one is, what do you need to know about climate change? And what do you need to learn about climate change? And what are the things that you must build skills in around climate change? And then what are the things that you need to build around photography? What are the things that you need to get better at in that space, right? And how do you merge those two worlds? And what is it that you need to know? So now I can look at education, not as a bunch of classes, but I can look at education to say, what are the classes that I need to take? What are the skills that I need to develop? What are the experiences that I need to have to build this passion that I have to solve the problem that I'm passionate about? Now, when you look at the world that way, then we're not talking about jobs anymore, right? We're talking about skills. And so for example, and that's important because let's say you're a student and you want to solve climate change and you want to do it through photography, and you realize through your research and identifying the area, you realize that one way of doing this would be to be a blogger or to write, to take pictures and write about what you see and what you experience. Okay, so that means I got to have really good writing skills. Now, a job comes up. There's a job out here that somebody needs, it's for a taxi company, and they need somebody to write a newsletter for their taxi company in Richmond, Virginia. And you're like, wait, that doesn't fit in my lines. It's not climate change and it's not photography. But it is. It's writing, right? And that's the skill that you develop. And so it's about finding opportunities that you are using to build skills that will get you to where you want to go. And all of a sudden now the world of jobs opens up to lots of different areas. If the thing that you need to learn is project management skills, which is the thing that I learned at Accenture, which has got me to where I am today, then where can I learn how to do that, right? And so I am working in the space that I'm working here now, not because of where I went to college, not because of what school I graduated. I mean, I went to SUNY Brockport. You know how many people from SUNY Brockport work at Google? One. All right. So it's the experiences and the skills that I developed along the way. And I developed them in the public sector. I developed them in consulting. I developed them in healthcare, and finance, and banking. And I build those skills across the board to get me to where I am today. And I put that together. So when you look at it that way, then jobs aren't jobs. They're a bunch of skills that you need to develop. But if you don't know what those skills are, then how are you ever going to develop them?
You mentioned writing and you mentioned project management as two important skills that I think all students would benefit from. Are there any other skills that immediately come to mind as particularly relevant for students, especially right now, given the time we're in?
Computer science. You have to know computer science because we now live in a digitalized economy, and that's what it's going to be forever, right? So, and by digitalization, I mean everything around machine learning, artificial intelligence, AR, VR, automation, AR, VR, all those things that are digitalization. I get to travel around the world and I can tell you that every industry, every government, every business, everything is figuring out what the angle of digitalization is going to be and how it's going to be built into whatever solutions that they create in the future. And what students need to understand is that we are at the very, 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 very beginning of that, right? And I'll give you an example of how I know we're at the beginning. Google had a breakthrough recently in quantum computing. And the breakthrough is this, and I'm not going to get into defining quantum computing, but it's probably something people should understand. But here's the breakthrough. If you took a mathematical equation, one of those calculations, those complex calculations, and fed it to a supercomputer, and the supercomputer would process that equation, the world's strongest supercomputer, I lost one of my lights, it would take 10,000 years for that supercomputer to process that equation, right? What Google was able to build, what the breakthrough was, is that they were able to go through that same equation in 300 seconds. 10,000 years versus 300 seconds. Think about what that future is going to look like and where we're headed, right? And what you need to understand is that the language for that future is computer science. And I'm not saying everyone needs to go become a computer scientist, but what I am saying is that you need to understand computer science. You need to understand computational thinking. You need to understand how these things fit into solutions that you create. And the example I can give you is, I'm sitting in downtown Phoenix right now. And the problem that I'm trying to solve is, how do I get to the airport? How do I get me from here to the airport? But I don't know that cars exist. What solutions am I going to come up with, right? I got an electric skateboard, I got a bike, but how am I going to carry a luggage? How am I going to carry my luggage on a bike? Oh, maybe I can create a sidecar to put the luggage in, and a lock to lock it up at the airport. Or, you know, the best solution, the most common solution is probably walking. So I can create a walking path. I can do mathematical formulas of how long it would take me to walk, and what the temperature is, and how far people walk, and all these things about walking. And I can create a really good solution about getting me from here to the airport by walking. But I don't know cars exist. Is that the best solution? So if you don't understand digitalization, if you don't understand the opportunity, the concepts of what's happening with computer science, then you're never going to create the best solutions. And that's what we need to be focused on.
And I want to zoom out a little bit, since we're on the topic of students. So we talked a bit about skills that students can focus on developing, but I also want to ask you, generally speaking, what advice do you have for any student who's graduating in 2020, who's kind of freaking out a little bit about what it means to be graduating right now? Yeah, and they should be freaking out, right? Like, that's okay that they're freaking out. I was supposed to write an article for ASU's magazine Thrive, right? So I wrote one about this whole idea of problem solving a couple of months ago, and they wanted me to write another one on advice for graduate students, people who are graduating in May. And this is like 2 months ago there, and I'm like, I don't know what to tell them. Are you kidding me? Well, you know what? Nobody knows where we are. But I'll give you an example of real advice that just literally happened yesterday. So I had a student from U of A reach out to me. I'm out there. It's easy to get a hold of me. And we'll talk about networking, and I hope we talk about networking, because I want to talk about that in a second. But the student reached out to me, and he said, hey, my internship that I was getting was taken away from me. What do I do? I'm freaking out. Can you help me find an internship? And my response back to the student was, okay, send out a message, and I will, broadcast it for you through my network, and something might come up. That's solution number one. Solution number two is, if money isn't an issue, and what you really, and you have a place, and you have structure and infrastructure to live in, and like, let's say you're living at home or whatever it is, and it's not about the money, it's about the experience, why not start something? Start a company, start a solution, start anything. And then, even if you fail miserably by the end of the summer, think about the experience that you have, and think about being able to put on your resume the things that you learned by going through that process. And I was, that was the first time I gave that recommendation to someone, and he wrote back to me, and this was mind-blowing to me. He wrote back to me, he's like, oh my God, I got like 3 ideas that I've been wanting to tackle for a long time. Like, what's stopping you, right? Like, what mindset, like this idea, like, so when students say, how do I get a job at Google? I'm like, don't get a job at Google, start Google, right? Start something. Like, and again, if you have some students have to do an internship to pay for their rent, and that's a completely different ballgame. But if you don't have those constraints, if it's about the experience, start something. We live in a long tail economy, right? We live now, you can, like, so here, I'll admit this to you guys, but I probably shouldn't. But I am in love with flat earthers. So no offense to anyone who's a flat earther. I love flat earthers. I love their theories. I love the way they argue reality. There's something about, it's like my Bachelor. Like, I love watching flat earth videos, right? And so I want to go to their conference. I want to be a speaker at their conference. I just love flat earthers. Now, I am a t-shirt designer. I'm a talented artist. I'm like, you know what? I'm not. I'm just saying I was. I could design some really funky, really cool flat earth t-shirts. Because I've seen some of these t-shirts that these people wear, and they're terrible, right? They were made on like Microsoft Color or something, right? Like,
But if I can create really cool t-shirts, now all of a sudden I can go to one of those sites that let me print my t-shirt logo onto t-shirts, and I can sell the whole thing will cost me $12. Now I can sell them for $25. I know exactly where they are. I know what YouTube channels they're on. I know where they are on Instagram. I know where they are on Facebook. I can market. I can target that group and sell flat earth t-shirts. We live in a long tail economy where you don't have to be general, right? You don't have to create stuff for the general population. You can be very niche-y. There's 6 million flat earthers. I know, scary, right? So being able to target them, if you reach 2% of that population, you're making $80,000 a year, right? So we live in this long tail economy and we don't see it that way. We're still thinking, in the micro when we should be thinking in the macro.
So you're saying business ideas that revolve around flat earthers, anti-vaxxers, good business opportunity for students to look into?
Sure, why not, right? But you know what? Look, students today, if you're a designer, you could be designing stuff on Fiverr. If you for some reason, if for one of those students whose mother had driven them crazy talking about antiques their whole lives, and I'm like, oh my God, if I have to hear one thing more about antiques, I'm gonna lose my mind. You know what? They're antique experts. Now all of a sudden they can go to thrift stores and find antiques and refurbish them or redo them and sell them on Etsy, right? They could find things at garage sales and flip them on eBay, right? Like the point is that opportunity to find something that you're passionate about, something that you want to dive deeper into, is there, and you could take advantage of that.
Mm-hmm. This issue of starting a business is actually something that's been brought up in several of the other interviews that we've done.
Yeah.
But I want to ask you, when it comes to businesses that people are either going to be starting because of this pandemic, because they're addressing a specific problem that they see that's being brought to light or worsened by the pandemic,
right,
or alternatively businesses that are going to grow because of this pandemic. So for example, let's take, maybe there's some fledgling local food delivery service that's going to grow, at least in the immediate short term. What do you have to say about how people can assess whether their ideas for businesses and projects are sustainable, or whether they're gonna kind of be more flash in the pan and doesn't even matter, or is it more important to just do something?
I think it's more about where you are in life, right? So sustainable is I got 2 kids at home and I got to pay a mortgage, right? That's sustainable. Being a student and I just want experiences, doesn't matter if the thing is sustainable, right? Like what you learn from that process is what you get out of it, right? And so I think it depends on where you are in life. Now, another interesting that just happened, and these are all real life examples, and it actually all happened this week. About Nextdoor, that site that that is fascinating to read through. Another thing that I'm fascinated with. I have a problem, but on Nextdoor, I live in downtown Phoenix. We have a great community. It's a very, we don't have HMOs. We all take care of each other. We started a book club. Like it's a really great community that we live in. One person, and we have our own locked, Nextdoor community. One of the people in that community said, hey, I was an event planner and I just got laid off. Bad. Instead of saying, does anybody know of any event planning jobs out there? What she said was, before I became an event planner, I used to have a florist business. Would anybody be interested in potentially as Mother's Day is coming up for me to make arrangements for people and then deliver them to your house? She had 300, yes, I'm in, right? And then I said, and then in the comments I go, hey, you know what my wife said, because I told her about this, and my wife said, what I would be interested in is I go to every week when I go to Sprouts, I bring home flowers, right? And now I can't go get flowers because that seems stupid to just go get flowers. And it would be great to have a service where every week somebody's delivering flowers, but not at the price point that these other services do it. So if you localize it, and if you can, let's say the flowers at Sprouts are $20. If you can localize it at $20, I'd much rather give you money than some corporation money, and you can create a business that way. And other people are like, yeah, I do that too. Now all of a sudden she's trying to figure out how to do this, right? So just assuming that nothing is out there for you, or you can test it. You can send an email to your friends. Like I always recommend to students, like what's your personal board of directors, right? What's your organization? So that you can go to with ideas, that you can go to for advice, that you go to and listen to. One of my videos on my YouTube channel is understanding the difference between validation and real feedback. Most people are asking for validation, right? So, so when my wife says, hey, do you think we should paint the wall blue or gray? And I go, gray. And she goes, no, what about blue? She's not asking for feedback. She's asking for validation, right? And so if you want real feedback, create a group of people that you will get feedback from. That's your personal board of directors, and go to them and say, look, this is my business idea that I have. Here's a 3-page business plan. What do you guys think? And they will give you real feedback. They'll be blunt and honest with you. Take a message, go out to your friends and be like, hey, I'm thinking about starting this. What do you guys think? And you'll get feedback, right? So there's ways to test the market, if you will, but sometimes you won't know until you just go out and do it.
And you mentioned earlier that you really want to get to topic of networking.
Yeah.
I want to get to the topic of networking too. Yes,
Okay.
I do. So, there's been discussion in previous interviews about the value of a network, obviously, and make friends, lean on your friends, look for network everywhere, not just in your classmates, but in your professors and, so on and so forth. But not many people have discussed tools like LinkedIn, Indeed, these large digital platforms and what role they can play in helping students grow a network. I think all students have a LinkedIn, but very few students, myself included, really know what to do with it. So I'd really love to hear your thoughts on that, on leveraging these digital tools to help students with building a network.
Yeah, all right, I'll take it even deeper than that. I think that I think that one of the things that we don't do really well teaching young people is the value of social capital, right? This idea that you are your reputation and that you are your network. And at the end of the day, human existence, since we were like, monkeys playing with bones, it's been about you scratch my back and I scratch your back, right? And this kind of what I call value proposition of a network has to be mutually beneficial. I can tell you, and LinkedIn is the platform to do that. You should have if you have an Instagram page, that's great. That's awesome. Who cares? A LinkedIn page is about your business. It's about you as a brand. It's about the place to capture your experiences. It's a place for you to comment. If you are in the world of making money, either through a job or running a business, and you're not on LinkedIn commenting on things, posting articles, leaving your opinion, creating a perspective, if you're not doing that, I don't know what you're doing. Right? That's where that stuff happens. I don't think that we look at LinkedIn as a social network platform. And I can tell you that my engagement on LinkedIn is far superior than it is on Facebook. I could care less what Aunt Sally thinks about some posts that I leave on Facebook, right? I care,
what she thinks about Flat Earth.
Right, what she thinks about Flat Earth. I care that Benito, the president, the CEO of Bank of America in Arizona, when he comments on an article that I post, that to me is much more enriching to my life than whatever I post on Facebook, right? So you got to look at LinkedIn as a social network platform for people who are interested in making a living. Right? If you're not interested in that, that's fine. If your gig is to travel around the world and go to Fiji and take selfies, and then you should be on Instagram. If that's not your thing, then you should probably be more active on LinkedIn. Now that you want to be more active on LinkedIn, I created 2 out of my videos on my YouTube channel are about LinkedIn because I keep getting frustrated with how people use LinkedIn, and so you should watch those. But
to them.
But one of them is, the first one I created was because I just got tired of the LinkedIn messages that I was getting. A lot of the times that you go to LinkedIn and I heard it in some of the advice points that you were bringing up, it's about, hey person, what can you do for me? Right? It's kind of like on a resume, right? Where I can tell you this is a secret. When I'm looking at resumes, and I don't do that so much in my current job, but like for other people or for businesses that I run, I will skip right over the highlight or the subject that says, I'm looking for an opportunity to grow my skills. I'm looking for an opportunity to build my capabilities. I'm like, I don't give what you're looking for. Like, I could care less what you're looking for, right? You're looking, that's great. You should go find that, right? I'm looking for you to add value to me, right? And that attitude needs to be in LinkedIn. So a lot of the messages that come through LinkedIn is, hi, Jamie. Well, first of all, let's talk about the ones that aren't, let's talk about the basic ones, which is, hi, Jamie, my name's Tom. Can you find me a job? I've had messages like that. I read them. By the way, on those videos, I don't call the people out. I don't embarrass anyone, but I actually read you the messages that I get, right? And it's time for me to do another one because I still got more. So a lot of them is like, hi, my name is Bob. Can you find me a job? And the ones that aren't like that is, hi, my name is Tom. I'm really interested in picking your brain about the education space because I want to really grow in the education space, and I want to build my skills in this space. I'd love to have an hour of your time so that you could teach me everything that you know. What does that sound like? Right? And so what I try to talk about in my videos is that it's got to be a mutual benefit. And one student that I was talking to, I said, you have to bring me value as much as you're asking me for my value. And the student said, well, I can't bring you any value. Like, you are this big guy at Google and I'm the student at the school and I don't have anything to give that you would want. And my response back to her was, I bet you've read an article about the business of education in the last 3 months that I haven't read, that you think I should read. That's value. And I use another example where a production company, someone's like, hey, we do presentation skills for executives. We've worked with your company in the past. Would love to talk about, people that you might know in your company that need to build their presentation skills. Also, here's an article that we wrote, a blog post that we wrote about why communication skills have to be a critical skill that students develop. Win-win. You're giving me something and you're asking me for something in return. That's the way the world works. And students that don't think that they're bringing value, think about you don't think you've read a research paper that I should read? You don't think there's an article that I should read? You don't think that there's a video clip that I should watch on YouTube because you know something about what I'm interested in? Like, there's so much value that you can bring me. And I would say that 0.3% of people who reach out to me on LinkedIn do it that way. It's about me, 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 me. It's not about you. It's about a mutual benefit in a relationship. And what is that? And your job, and I know it's hard to think, but your job is to figure out what that is, right? What is that mutual benefit? How can I bring that person a mutual thing, right? And so when you think about networking and social capital, it's more about building a mutual agreement between the people that you're in your network with, where we're all going to bring each other value. And look, I'm the little guy here, so I'm going to only be able to throw in pennies. And you're the rich guy, you're going to be able to throw in thousands, but we're all throwing in and we're all benefiting from each other, right? And that's okay. And so it's a different approach to how you network that you need to think about.
Yeah, that is excellent advice.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah. And before we get to the last question,
yeah,
I do have one more question for you that's
okay.
On the topic of potential value creation, you could say. And I was not planning on asking this, but as a science and technology studies student, I think I have to. So, as education becomes increasingly digitized and learning potentially becomes consolidated onto a few large platforms, Google, Zoom, those come to mind.
Sure.
What do you say to those who are concerned about monitoring tech and possibly advertising efforts driven by data collection? I don't know. I mean, there's the term surveillance capitalism that was put out on a Zuboff last year. Mm-hmm. are your thoughts on that and the connection to online learning and education?
Yeah, and I think privacy, security, all those things are things that we should be talking about, and there should be advocacy groups about it, and that we should definitely be doing things in that space. So that's number one. As a consumer, that's what I want. I mean, I'm not going to be working at Google much longer, so this is a concerning thing for me. I'm not a robot, right? Like I'm a consumer too. So these are things that I think about and care about, and I take precautions of doing that, because I knew stuff about this space. So I never used my Facebook login because it was easy to log into another website, for example, right? I'm like, no, I'm going to separate all my different things, right? So many people use their Facebook credentials to log into everything, and now everything gets passed across the board. I didn't do that, right? So being smart about how to do this, being smart about how to keep your data safe, being smart about what's private, what isn't, and everything. And think about, how many people are advocates for privacy and security, and I just go to their Facebook page and realize that they have 0 privacy settings set up, like their entire world is out there, right? So like we got to be smarter about what that looks like, and we should have. And I'm bought into the Andrew Yangs of the world and others who are like, we are a commodity. We have value to these companies, and we should be demanding things for that value, right? That's the premise of universal basic income, right? Is this idea that I'm adding value and I should get paid for that. And a free app shouldn't be the reward that I get for that, right? And so we should be talking more about that. Now, at the same time, these are not new things. So, I often think about the fact that when I was growing up, again, this is in the olden days, I still remember black and white television sets. There were literally 3 channels on TV. And that's just so hard for people to imagine, right? There's 3 channels on TV. 3. That's it. And PBS, that always came in fuzzy. You couldn't see it. 3 channels.
Not 3 streaming services?
No, 3 channels. 3 channels.
What?
Think about the power of 3 channels. Think about the power of advertising, the power of data collection, the power of we want you to see this, and you ain't got no choice but to sit there on your couch with your big giant remote control that's plugged into the TV and watch it, right? Like that's power, right? Now when I look at it that way, from that perspective, like I feel like I got the power. I can watch anything I want. I can go all over the place. I can control anything, right? So we got to be careful with how we define power. One of my favorite quotes, and I thought it was on my desk, was this kind of quote that was like, these young people, the minds of young people will be corrupted and lost as they dive deeper into the internet. Oh no, sorry, it wasn't the internet. It was plays and romances, and it's from 1790. Right, like this idea that this concept has been around for a very long time, and so we got to understand that too. That I see people. I see this great picture of people on a train reading the paper. Right, the people in that train are all reading the exact newspaper. Think about that power. Think about being the only newspaper in town. So. Are things more powerful today, or were they when there was only one newspaper? Now is the only place to get information. So, I tend to go back and forth on that, but I do think that and then the last thing I'll say is that I actually work for one of the tech companies, and I think about the things that I've gotten away with over the last 14 years, and if I'm not being observed and surveyed, then I don't think anybody is, right? So it's just, we got to think about that, right? We have to think about all those different aspects. But absolutely, we need privacy and security, and there should be advocacy groups, and there should be organizations that we support and that we finance and that are there to speak for us.
I agree with all of that. Excellent points about consumer behavior and appropriate digital hygiene. But do you think that there should be any change on the behavior of the platforms themselves?
Yes, absolutely. Right. I think that there should be change behavior, and you see some of that change behavior, and you see some of the like this is all new to everyone, right? It's not like someone had this big master alien plan and that pressure is going to come from users, and it's going to change is going to come from advocacy groups, and change is going to come from regulations. And you know, the world was going to blow up when the tech companies were required to take people off of the internet sites, when Europe said you have a right to do that, and we survived, right? So those things are going to come, but they have to come through change, right? They have to come through the pressure that we put on organizations. I never expect anyone to change without an incentive, right? Whether that incentive is positive or negative, you know, change for the goodness of your heart is not an expectation that I have with people.
Oh, yes. And it seems that we have arrived at our final question.
All right.
A little bit of a fun one.
Okay.
Your chance to be inspiring, as we say to most of our guests.
Okay.
If you were to write a book.
Sorry, I failed so far, but go ahead.
Oh, no.
No, I'm just kidding. Go ahead.
Hour.
I know, this is just
This
going
is
to wrap it all up.
This is the cherry on top, so to speak.
Okay.
If you were to write a book reflecting on this time, what would the title be? And you can take a second to think about that one.
If I was going to write a book, what would the title of that book be?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, reflecting on this strange time that we're currently living in.
That's a good question. I think that the title of, so I'm actually in the process of writing a book, and slowly, and the title, and I already have the title, and it's called the Hoodlum's Guide to Thriving in America, right? And so it would have to be some kind of derivative of that, right? Which is this idea that I think, so for me, it would be like the Hoodlum's Guide to Self-Isolation. Oh, my surprise. You guys want your surprise now? You guys have been good.
Yes. Yes, please. Is it what I think it is? Oh my God.
I wish my cat was
Hi,
here.
Luna. This is Luna, who is good and slept through the whole interview.
Oh.
Luna is an eight-week-old lab, and this is her second day in our house.
Oh my
Wow.
God. That is adorable.
Well, can I just say that collar goes so well with her fur color.
Yeah. Her pink collar, she's Luna.
Oh, I do wish I had my obese cat that I could show off now. But
Well, we were going to get a cat. Somehow we went from a cat to this. I'm not really sure how that happened.
Why not both?
Yeah, exactly. What's wrong? You need to go outside? Okay, I got to take her outside before she pees on me.
Understood.
So, living in America,
Hoodlum's Guide to Thriving in Quarantine, in isolation, in the apocalypse, if you want to get more dramatic.
Right.
I like that.
Alrighty, well, I think that about wraps it up. Thank you so much for
Thanks
taking
for having me.
chat with this series and to lend your voice to this project.
Yes.
We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'd love to see how it turns out at the end, and make sure you send me stuff.
Absolutely.
Will do.
And for anyone who's watching this, you can find all of these videos on our website, futureofwork.ucdavis.edu. Thanks for watching.